I'm not rage quitting. I'm just getting to the lesson because I'm excited about it. All right. So here we go. You get so excited. I'm genuinely so excited about doing this. Let me go ahead and switch a few things around. You guys ready to see how professional I am at a streamer? You guys are ready for this, all right? Ready? Boom! Now we're on my desktop. So, as I was mentioning, I've been studying a lot of stories recently while I'm a film student. So, like, we look at movies and we look at, I mean, ideally movies. We've looked at TV shows. We have a video game section later on in this advanced class I'm taking, but I've learned a lot about story structure and how, like, stories are working. And I was sitting here playing Dead Space, I was like, hang on, a lot of these things match up. So I was like, and then I did a Google search and I was on YouTube and I was like, video game structure, and nothing comes up. Everything is focused on like mechanics and things. And I was like, no one really pays attention to how video game stories work. But I think it's kind of interesting. So I've put together this little slideshow for you all to enjoy with me. And first things first, I mainly wanted to do this live and not just make a video because I want to know if I'm wrong. Because I'm making things as I go and I'm, testing on myself. But if you guys have a game or something that, like, goes out of these rules that I've created, I want to know because I want to solve that. And if, like, the whole thing gets remapped or anything, like, I want to fix that. Um, so to start, anyone who's played video games, I've found 4 video games that are all that are different. Out of all video games in the whole wide world, there are four. They all fall into these 4 categories. All right, and this first one is the linear story. Okay, so these are games that every interaction the player has is scripted. So no matter like what route you take, no matter what things stay locked until eventually you move forward, and then you can move on, right? So that's what, like, games like Dead Space. I love Dead Space. I'm going to be talking about that game a lot because it followed a lot of my rules that I was making, and it's a really fun game. Also, Legend of Zelda and Batman Arkham Knight, like, those are the ones I have up here. But most games that, like, have a set ending can do are linear story games. So I'm reading your comments right now. Yes, no, maybe you're right, Shrelt, and just do a separate video. But I don't know. Maybe I'll just be the next Penguin Zio and just go live and then see what happens. um, I've also noticed, like, in more recent times, linear stories have become less popular because people, like, developers like to show off what they're making, and they like to make, bigger scope games, and as well as, like, technical advancements in technology where previously a game could only run this, but now we're on or this, and so you couldn't fit all of multiple things if they weren't going to get seen. Like, why would you do that? So, and then this next one is the branching story. So, as linear stories have set endings, a branching story could have multiple endings. So, you have this. Everyone starts this game in a new setup usually, and then as they play, they make decisions, and that alters the end of the game. Obviously, is Undertale. Like, that's when people think of games that, like, your choices matter. I think Undertale comes to my mind, at least, because that one there's 3 different endings. I think maybe there's a few secret ones where you can either kill everybody or spare everybody or do a mix, and that changes the outcome of the game. I'm halfway through Baldur's Gate, a little over halfway now, and Baldur's Gate is interesting because you also there's lots and lots of ways to play Baldur's Gate, and I'm talking about main story here. We'll talk about subplots later, but I'm talking about main plots, and I'll get back into that as I mention the third act structure later on. So next is a simulator game. So these are games where the player repeatedly returns to the game as, like, to complete a task. So these are games like Call of Duty Zombies, at least Modern Warfare 3, because that's set in like a live, just a big map. You go in, you get money, and you improve in the game, and then you exit, and then that improves you. That improves you for the next time you go in to the game. So they contain like a little bit of story to get the player started, but afterward the player gets into a game loop, which we'll mention later. A game loop is an important term to remember because we're going to remember that. I feel like a professor. I'm not a professor. I'm just having fun. And so like, you know, I have written, you collect the resources, you gain an advantage by collecting a resource, either by crafting that something or, and then you gain access to new resources that can put you back at the beginning where you collect the better resources. So Project Zomboid, most recently, they got a lot of hate, is Skull and Bones. I played this game, I played the trial for this game, and I have a friend who really, really likes it. And that's, the Skull and Bones is a ship. Here, let me go ahead and Google it for you. Skull and Bones has been getting a lot of backlash for feeling like it's unfinished and things. But Skull and Bones is a pirate game where you sail the seas. That's sweet. I don't know. You could find monsters in there. And, go collect resources and upgrade your boat and eventually reach a higher level. And, that's the kind of a game loop I'm talking about. Project Zomboid has been mentioned. So finally is an arcade game. So these have been really, really common recently, where story's almost non-existent. I have Call of Duty right here. I think this is Call of Duty. I'm thinking of Call of Duty. Call of Duty does have a story, but it's separate to the multiplayer. So I'm talking about mostly like multiplayer kind of games. So games like Fortnite or any other Battle Royale games mostly end up being an arcade game. And the difference between like a simulator and an arcade game is an arcade game is mostly entirely contained. Like you have a set goal in a match, you get the match and you win, right? And in a simulator game, you may have like a goal to collect a resource or something, but it's not usually set. It's usually up to you. And then you go out, you collect the resource, you do it, and you're back in the loop. But this one's you finish it and then you start a new game, right? So I have Mario Kart here. I think this follows what I'm saying, where you have a match, your goal is to get first, second, third, at least, you're going for first, and then if you get that or if you don't, the thing is over. I also have, arcade games may have like lore, they often do not have story. So like, the difference is that a story is found in the game by playing it. Like it's pretty obvious to find. But lore is like someone putting on their nerd glasses and saying, actually, I've read the developer's manual, and they stated, as a player, we shouldn't have to, the average player shouldn't have to research story to figure out what they're doing. So that's why it's an arcade game. So now we're here to this stuff that I've been learning a lot about in school, okay? And this is the 3-act structure. Thank you, Tyler, for confirming that. 3-act structure is as simple as beginning, middle, end. That's it, right? And it took me a minute to realize that. So as I've been learning in film, so this panel here is going to all apply to film, and then we'll adjust it for video games because it changes, and I think it's interesting. But the first act of a film does two things. It introduces the world and it sets the main tension. And in video games, it's most commonly referred to as the main quest, right? In my film classes, we call it the main tension. What does the main character have to solve? In video games, it'd probably be called the main quest. So in film, this usually takes up 25% of the movie or two sequences, which I'll mention later. And then we move into the second act. And the second act takes up 50% of the story. And that's the middle of everything. That's where the character struggles to accomplish the main tension. They struggle to do that. It's also where tensions get raised. And in video games, I've noticed, it's where the big, bad, evil guy gets introduced. And usually in the middle of the second act, the main tension either evolves or resolves. So in the middle of a movie, usually, you'll find that a movie ramps up to like, are they going to do this thing? And in the very middle of the movie, usually in like about 10-minute span of the movie, They either solve it, or the problem gets worse, or something gets in the way. So we call that a culmination in my film classes, which I really like that word. So, but I haven't noticed that I've noticed the culmination in some things. So, in Dead Space, there's a culmination where you get introduced to the Doctor, the evil Doctor, for the first time. For those that have played it, and then there's the end, the third act, which is the end of the story, where the protagonist concludes the main tension previously set, like completely, like there's no loose ends, and all the subplots get tied up in a nice bow, and the movie ends, usually. And that's kind of the basic baby beginning, middle, end of a movie usually. And this is all just what I've been mentioning. You get introduced, things get set up, stakes get higher, rising action. They might solve it, they might not, and then in some movies there's a crisis. There's something that's like a third act twist that changes everything, and they have to like do a loop-de-loop and make sure it's solved in one final effort, and then everything gets wrapped up. If you guys have any questions about this, I would love to try and answer them to the best of my ability. I'm still not a professor, so. Now, 3-act structure is interesting because it like applies to almost everything, and I've learned this too. Like movies and scene sequences, episodes even, and movie series all follow a 3-act structure because it's less first act, second act, third act, and more beginning, middle, and end. In a scene, you set up like, hey, we need to get to point B, and then on the way they get bombed or something, and then they manage to make it out, and that could be a scene, and that's a beginning, a middle, and an end, or a 3-act structure. I have this here for like Finding Nemo. I don't really want to go through everything. You guys follow this so far? You guys are making sense? Although we could go through this, but it's been a minute since I've seen Finding Nemo. Because now we get into the new stuff, all right? So this is all going to apply mostly to linear and branching games, because arcade games and simulator games usually don't have story as strong, right? I've noticed in video games, well, you have a beginning, a middle, and end. A middle end is way bigger in video games, because that's where all the fun is, right? As I was mentioning earlier, sequences. So movies tend to follow an 8-sequence pattern, which like changed my life, guys. Like for writing movies, it's just writing 8 short films. Crazy. And then it's split up, 25, 50, 25. 2 dedicated to the first act, 4 to the second, and 2 to the final third act. But I haven't really found like a sequence structure for video games. They all tend to be a little different, being longer or shorter and stuff. And sometimes, like, the first act especially is even really small. Like, there, I have this linked. Be gone. So this is the Baldur's Gate 3 intro cinematic, right? Does anyone play Baldur's Gate 3, by the way? Okay, subplots are interesting. I have those, I think, on the next slide. So we'll get to those. Alright. I don't know if this is going to be playing, because... Is this playing anything? Because I think it might be playing through here. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. Hang on a minute. I just got to switch my... Okay, that should fix it. Yes? No? No. Interesting. Okay, well, I can't play videos, so... I'll narrate it, This is the intro to Baldur's Gate 3. There is this girl named Lae'zel, and then there's this evil guy, and he has this little bitty tadpole, and he puts it in her eye, and you're like, I don't want that to happen to me. Yeah, look at this. Icky. Ah! You're lucky you don't have sound design for this. Anyway, and then he leaves, and then you get some more exposition on what's going on out here, which is that this guy's not very nice. He wants to be a little kid playing with toys, but he's a grown man, so he can't really do that. And then there's dragons fighting it, because it's D&D. Bye, buddy. And then, they set more things up, and then wherever it is. Oh, I missed it. It must be right over here, right here. Because he gets another one, and he looks at, yeah, here it is. So he puts it in Lae'zel's eyeball, and then he comes over to you and makes you look at him using his force powers. And, yeah. So, he puts it in your eyeball. And then eventually, you land, you get off this ship. Like, because right at the end of the cutscene, you make your character, right? Go back, we're not there yet. So, that was the inciting incident. Not if they're destroying towers, Tyler. So, because the main plot to Baldur's Gate, there's a lot of subplots, but the main plot is get the little tadpole out of your eyeball, out of your brain. But that's when it gets set up. Like, that tiny little section compared to the 80-hour game ahead of it, that was 6 minutes? Like, that is a tiny, tiny portion, and the main tension has more or less been set up. And that's different than movies. So, anyway, moving on. As the second act, I mentioned how the second act usually gets all the limelight because that's where the action takes place. I also have a whole Dead Space thing set up, but it's hard to follow. Let me. Oh my gosh! Be quiet. Boop. So Dead Space. Look, they've already landed on the ship, right? So Dead Space works a little bit closer to a movie, where it gets set up a little slower than Baldur's Gate. But you start on here on the ship, and you get a little more exposition about your character, about why he's there, and then you move on to getting in the ship. This is, let me see. Yeah, so there's like, oh, something's going weird on the ship. Maybe we should look into that. And you do. And that's setting up the incident, which is that there are monsters on the ship. And they do that to people, and that's not cool. And suddenly, you're trapped on a broken ship. Not cool. So the main quest is survive. In fact, this originally gets set up as a sequence for Chapter 1 to get back to your ship, but you can't go through there because there's a monster. Right? So this whole first sequence, I'm calling it a sequence, they call it a chapter in the game, is get back to the ship, and on your way, you get introduced to a weapon, you get introduced to how to kill the bad guys, stasis. These are all like second act things. These are all like we're setting things up, first act things, where we're setting up things, we're introducing the player to things that they're unfamiliar with. And I can't tell, I wish there were timestamps on here for chapters, but it can't be here. Okay, it's a little behind this. I'll make timestamps for my next stream. Yeah, here. So finally you work your way back and you manage to get back to this ship, which is damaged a little bit. And you get this like half cut scene, and you go in here and everything seems chill. You're like, hey, we need to get out of here. You're explaining what's going on. When suddenly, where's it at? You get this little argument. Here we go. There should be, over. Sorry guys, it's been a minute. There's a monster attacking your ship. And they're like, this isn't very great. We gotta evacuate. And, yeah. and the ship blows up. Boom. In fact, I think you fly out the window, like out of the front window, which is, yeah, lucky. Very lucky. Yeah, so this gets destroyed, and now you're back on the infested ship. What can you do? So now it becomes, don't get off the ship, or instead of get to the ship, it's survive and find a different way off the ship. And that's what the rest of this game is right here at 39 minutes ish, like 45, I guess. I think is when it's mentioned. But this is when your main tension is set up, which is, can you survive by getting off of this ship? And things move forward. You have to accomplish different tasks. And then at the end, maybe you do. I won't spoil this game. I think it's too good to be spoiled. Makes sense? Whoa. Guys, I missed the chat. What are we talking about? Can't buy father figure. Think. Anyway. Yeah, so that's then we move into the third act of video games, which it tends to be kind of short. But that's where you fight the big bad evil guy at the end of the game. And once you defeat that, usually everything wraps up. And that's kind of the culmination, is the third act. So if there are only 3 acts, and movies are only 2 hours, usually, why are video games so long? And that's when we enter these subplots and side quests. Because unlike movies, where you have a limited amount of time to talk about things, games can be anywhere from 5 hours to hundreds of hours, which is crazy. So once this main tension is set up, that's where you can bring in subplots and side quests. I say once the main I mentioned how subplots come in during the second act, which is true because sorry, it is a pattern for subplots to show up during the second act in movies, and that also seems to be apparent in video games as well. So you have your main plot that we talked about, and then you have subplots, little side quests that, like, if you go and don't really affect the main tension, right? You can come back to the main tension. This right here, if you're curious, this is a list of all the side quests in Skyrim. So all of these are completely unrelated to the main quest of Skyrim. A movie can't do that. Like, a movie can pick one and stick with it. But a video game, they have all the time in the world, really. As much time as the player is willing to give, they can spend time in the game. In Baldur's Gate, most obviously, Baldur's Gate is another one with a lot of subplots. In fact, I want to know how many side quests are in Baldur's Gate. Oop. This doesn't have anything. I guess this hasn't been discovered yet. Yeah. That's too bad. So, anyway. At least I've found the most obvious ones is you get that little parasite in your eyeball. Big sad. And then you meet these other people who all have the same problem. And as you explore the world and talk to them, you can understand more about their past, and you can actually help out. Like Karlak, for example, her heart's going to explode if you don't get a certain type of metal. And if you get the certain type of metal, she's really, really grateful. And that's a subplot. In Dead Space, it works more like a movie, which is why I think I really like Dead Space. Is it's very slow. Schwartz says Among Us. If you're asking Among Us for what kind of game it is, I'd say that's an arcade game, because you don't carry anything over between matches, and all the story you learn about that game is through lore. You don't find that out through the game. Oh, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Dead Space. So this is Nicole Brennan, She's a character that shows up in like chapter 2, I think, as a hologram, and then you follow her story a little bit more. And her story is all about how the ship got infected in the first place. So that technically is unrelated to the main quest, which is survive. Learning about why you need to survive, or not why you need to survive, but learning about why the ship is infested is a subplot. And you learn about that, and it gets resolved at the end of the game as well, I think. And that's actually a lot of reading for that. Is you can talk to her, and she gives like a basic one, but you can also find things around. Let's see, what else do I have? Right, movies usually have one or two subplots, but branch store games and linear store games, like they can have so many. It's crazy. But that also makes video games unique. So we move on to chapter scene structure. So I kind of mentioned this. In Dead Space, almost every mission follows this process, which is the player has a goal that must be completed, and they set out to solve it. For example, there's a mission where the asteroids are in the way of the ship before, so you can't fly away without destroying the asteroids. On their way, you have multiple tasks to complete. For example, you have to unlock actually outside to shoot them, and you also have to link your gun to like a missile thing, and that's all separate goals to completing the mission, the level. And then once you complete those tasks, you can complete the goal, and then you can complete the level and move on to the next one. So if I still have, I think I still have it up. Yeah. I don't know if I'll find it, but for once in a while, you get this little thing, and this, this is later. Let's see. Sorry about the ad for South Park. So I think here he's trying to turn back on the lights. Yeah, I'll dive more into things later about specific items. But if you guys follow what I'm saying, you get set up with something like a beginning, and then it is a lot like TV shows, because in a TV show it follows the same thing. Something gets set up in the episode, they complete the thing by the end of the episode. If it's something like Breaking Bad, then the thing they complete in the episode at the end sets up the thing for the next episode, and then leaves you kind of on a cliffhanger because it sets up a new tension that has to be resolved next episode. All in while encompassing this main quest. And you're right, video games work much more like that, where you have one task to complete the way larger goal. You have to destroy the asteroids to eventually reach safety. So that's kind of what I mean by chapter scene structure, which I'd like to study more, because in movies it's 8 usually. Usually. In video games it seems to be all over the place, but I'm sure there's a pattern somewhere. Anyway, let's move on. So this is the final thing I have to mention, which is the types of levels. This is half finished right now. I really want to know your guys' thoughts on this. So I think I have 3 so far. 3 types of levels, which is an adventure, and that's the most common, I'd say, which is they require the player to reach a location and then challenges the player to do that. In Dead Space, and usually once they reach the place, there's a challenge there too. Going back to the asteroid, the asteroid is, you have to get to the outside to destroy the asteroids. Okay, so you get to point A to point B, and then, oh no, you have to match your gun to the laser cannon. Okay, so then you have to go match your gun to the laser cannon. All the while there's monsters. And then you get to point B finally, and you open up the airlock, and you get out there and you shoot the asteroids. That's an adventure, and a lot of other games follow that too. And then a collection level is less common, but it's where the player has to find and interact with multiple items before proceeding. If anyone's played Dead Space, there's one with the Weezers, and they're like these little lung creatures that, like. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. You have to go find them and like paralyze them or something like that. If you've played any like Legend of Zelda game, there's before you unlock a temple. I don't know if it's in all of them actually, but before you unlock a temple, you usually have to go find the pieces of the key. So if you ever have a level where you need to go find certain pieces to get somewhere else, I'd call that a collection level. Um, yeah, and then I have the game loop, but I want to mention how these are different than just collecting random items because they're specific. Like once you pick them up, they're gone forever. Like that's how you evolve the story. And then finally, we have loop, like a game loop. And this is where the player searches for a resource and they can utilize them to improve their gameplay in the future, just like those simulator games we were talking about. So these items are usually found in like broad locations throughout the map, like maybe like areas and things, but they're not specifically placed like a collection item. They're always available. So while most games do not highlight game loops as their main mechanic, most games include smaller game loops like upgrading gear, which is why I have this little thing here, this is Skyward Sword. This is one of my favorite games, mainly because I just played it as a kid. But in this, you have to, if you want to upgrade your shield, you have to collect these 4 items. These 4 items can be met by killing monsters, by collecting tumbleweeds, or sometimes there's bugs you have to collect, right? And so those are out in the dangerous world, and you go collect them, you bring back, and then you improve it. This is not anything to do with the main quest. This isn't like even a level. This is completely optional. But I think it's worth mentioning that games can have a game loop. It probably should have a game loop, even if it's not their main thing. In fact, that's what this is. This is a screenshot from this video by Game Maker's Toolkit, which when I turn this into a video, I'll link that because if you're interested in game creation, this is certainly something to look at. Where this is the same thing I just described with visuals. So here's your inventory, here's the world, and I'll explain that in a second. So your character gets things from the world. In the video, they call this a tap. So killing monsters, collecting bugs, picking up items. They go to your inventory. Very cool. Now there are 3 things that can happen in your inventory. You can craft better items, just like depicted here. You can trade for items or get more expensive things by trading them for money and then using this as for then improving your gear. And you also have a drain. And a drain is usually if your character dies, you lose items. So if you get something and you die, it's going to go back to the world and you have to go back and get it. Cool, right? So this goes on in the second act of a game. And all these level mechanics are identified by their goal. What makes games interesting and unique are the challenges the player overcome to accomplish them. This right here is what people get excited about making games for, with good reason. Is following a cookie cutter layout where, player gets put in a war, they have to survive, maybe they're caught, and then they escape. That can be considered boring. I don't think it's boring, but maybe that's just because I like movies. But for a video game creator, that sounds sad. That sounds like the player doesn't have much to do. But this right here is, what if you had a game where, I don't know, give me an example of a game, guys. What if you had a game where you were Subnautica, where you were underwater and you had to go find things and you had to survive, and it's all set underwater and you have to fight big monster beasts? Like, that's not necessarily following this. That is following what mechanics you have to have. So this is my lesson that I have today. Ta-da. I get really excited about this. In fact, I want to keep continuing and looking for different levels and different things that a game uses to involve players. So I think I'll write something up for next week. Let me just go ahead and switch back over to our game. And I also I thought it'd be really cool if I kind of found these as I was playing. So I downloaded this game called Firewatch. It's about a 4-hour game. I'm thinking about playing it on Thursday. So if you're interested in seeing me play a game and talking about maybe the story structure that we've mentioned, this is a 4-hour game that I don't know how much I'll play, but maybe Thursday night or something. I'm not sure. Keep track of my Instagram. I'll play this game live, and you guys can comment or do whatever you like. Another game I'd like to mention is Amnesia: The Bunker. This game follows things pretty closely as well. I think horror games are a great genre for video games because that's, it's horror movies are different than horror games. Like they have a different emotional tone. I'd also like to play Dead Space again sometime. But for now, I've been in Alan Wake. I also want to mention how, big bad evil bad guy, big bad evil guy, they don't show up until usually the second or third, at least in Alan Wake and in Dead Space. The big bad evil guy doesn't show up until like the second or third, usually third or fourth chapter, and he's only hinted, like not shown. In Dead Space, it's just a tentacle that grabs you. In Alan Wake, you just see some trees get knocked over. So that's my lesson, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be here playing games for another 15 minutes, I think, and then if you guys want to stick around, you can. If you got things to do, I get it. If you want to ask me any questions, I'm here to learn just as much as you guys are here to listen. So let me know.